Welcome guys, welcome back to my to Minko's Corner once again. Today we're back with the animated history of the Ukraine. I was like, you know what? The way the idea for this video came about was basically with all the drama that's been going on around the Ukraine and Russia these past few days, past few weeks. I want to know more. And yeah, great video. Let's go and leave a like and all that.
The Samurai Limited Edition pin is available now. Hurry and
What?
order yours now before they run out. Or get one for free by signing up at Patreon like all of these nice people.
Okay, everybody makes
This
spins
episode
nowadays,
is
you know?
supported by Raycon, a wireless earbud company co-founded by Ray J and
Sorry guys, go buy Raycon.
Ukrainian
Yeah.
identity long precedes the formation of any nation state on this soil. The modern geopolitical entity and the current Ukrainian crisis can all trace their roots back to the land's unique geography and some of Europe's most fascinating cultures. An identity that has its foundations in no less than 3 geographic features: the Eurasian steppes, the Dnieper River, and of course, the Black Sea. These 3 very important parts of Ukraine not only shape its culture and identity, but have also made Ukraine a pawn in the strategic and economic games of larger powers, especially between Russia and the West. During the centuries of Russian hegemony, this was less of a problem. Monarchs and autocrats don't really care much for identity politics after all. But post-independence, the centuries of influence from outside powers have started to show. But Ukraine has its own nationhood and a story that goes all the way back to the migration of nomads through the Pontic-Caspian steppe.
I've never reacted to this channel. It looks awesome. I love the animation. World War One. Beautiful animation.
Well, it's been a long time coming, the remake of my old Ukraine video. Let's see if I can get it right this time. Now I know what you're thinking. Doesn't Ukraine's history begin with the Slavic migrations? And the answer is kind of yes, but the nomadic cultures of the Eurasian steppes are inseparable from Ukraine's early development. A steppe, in geographic terms if you're not aware, lends itself almost exclusively to the development of nomadic societies. They lack geographic boundaries for defense, materials for building, and the grazing patterns of animals mean that, well, you go where the food goes. This is one of the reasons why the horse was domesticated in the steppes. It made travel and hunting easier, and facilitated the raiding of rival tribes. And if a horde got big enough, it might start raiding, say, the crumbling Roman Empire. Hordes of Alans, Huns, Avars, Bulgars, and Khazars had passed through this area on their way to the rich lands of Rome, and each had left a massive influence on the Slavs and directly caused their migrations in the first place. If you think about it, the only place being worse than Rome would have been like anything on the way to Rome. Next is our second geographic feature, the Dnieper River, which means we get to talk about Vikings. Now, the lands of the Slavs you see were pretty irresistible to the Swedish Vikings. No centralized control, tons of wealth to raid and trade for, and hundreds of miles of long navigable rivers through it all, at the end of which lies the jackpot itself, Constantinople. It wasn't long before these Norsemen,
I like how he uses the Cyrillic alphabet and the Latin alphabet to illustrate the cities. That's very nice.
who the Slavs called Rus, had built a huge trade empire centered on the Dnieper River, an old Khazar trading post called Kiev. Now, of course, the Slavs did eventually expel the Vikings from their land, but then quite ironically, politely asked them to return and rule them, which began the medieval state known as the Kievan Rus. To try and create some unity through religion, Prince Vladimir the Great sent envoys to all the neighboring lands to study their various faiths, who reported that the Jews had lost Israel and therefore couldn't possibly be a blessed people.
I know one thing. I know there were a lot of Jews in Russia at some point, and I think they were banished, unless I'm mistaken, during Stalin. We'll see.
The Muslim Bulgars were sad and stinky, their words, not mine, and also prohibited drinking, to which old Vlad here laughed,
Gotta take a
saying
bath,
drinking
man.
is
Gotta
the
take a
joy of the
bath."
Rus, before finally settling on Christianity. To be specific, Eastern Orthodox
Yeah,
Christianity,
yeah.
ostensibly because of how impressed his envoys were with the Hagia Sophia, but between you and me, I think they were just trying to suck it up to the Byzantines. His son, who had become known as Yaroslav the Wise, greatly expanded the prosperity of the Rus state with Ukraine's oldest body of codified laws. Although the Rus were pretty prosperous, they soon fragmented into regional rival city-states for 2 main reasons. One was the arrival of the Cumans, who took control of Crimea and severely handicapped their
The
trade
Mongols
routes,
are coming.
and two was the decline of its most wealthy ally, Constantinople, thanks to a little event called the Fourth Crusade. You really can trace a lot of Europe's history to this event, huh?
Yeah.
Due to increased infighting, the Rus cities were at their weakest point in decades, and so probably wouldn't deal very well with, say, oh, I don't know, a horde of more than 30,000 mounted archers from Mongolia?
The Mongols are coming, guys. Flee. Run.
Ooh, just their rotten luck. The part I want to focus on here during an era called the Mongol-Tatar yoke is not so much the rapid rise of the Golden Horde, which made the Rus its glorified cash cow through extortion, but rather its inevitable and arguably more important collapse. Because in what was the medieval Rus state, three regional powers would come to fill the Mongol vacuum, forever driving a wedge between the northeast and the southwest. Moscow would consolidate in the north, becoming the genesis of the Russian state, but for Ukraine, that genesis was in Lithuania.
What?
It's hard to conceptualize this today, but the Lithuanian state once stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea, later forming a union with Poland, absorbing swathes of those old Mongol.
Dude, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth got screwed. Screwed. I mean, there were three partitions that happened, and they went from being this huge empire in the east of Europe to being nothing, and then the Polish state disappeared for 100 years after, after Napoleon. It came back during Napoleon under the Duchy of Warsaw, and then it disappeared again. I mean, it's such a fucking sad history.
Mongol Rus lands, which in Latin they called Ruthenia.
Oh, yeah.
This was the turning point for...
Guys, if you wanna... All the names, the only reason why I know all the names is because when you play Crusader Kings 3 or 2 or Europa Universalis, dude, I know so much about like 13th, 14th century Europe. It's just insane. And just because of the games, you know?
For the lands of the Rus controlled by the West, diverging from those controlled by Moscow.
Oh, no.
Through the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, what would become Ukraine had a direct line to Western philosophy and liturgy.
Look how big the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was. And now Lithuania is this, small Baltic state. Poland, finally is a bigger country than, it's finally a country, let alone a bigger one,
With the Greek Catholic or Uniate Church flourishing in this period, whereas Moscow was isolated and inherited its autocratic rule from the Mongols.
Yeah.
Even more so, symbolically, Moscow saw itself as the Third Rome, the defender of the Orthodox faith, which...
I love this. I'm sorry I'm pausing, but it is what it is. I love this iconography. The symbol of... This is the symbol of the Russian Empire. It's gorgeous, isn't it? It has a lot of correlation between this one and the Holy Roman Empire, but yeah.
Further alienated it from the West. Then we have our third regional power, the Crimean Khanate, a rump state of the Mongol-influenced Cumans, whom the Slavs simply called Tatars. And here we get to talk about one of the most fascinating aspects of Ukrainian history. With the introduction of serfdom, a more severe form of feudalism, thousands of peasants fled to the vast, open, sparsely populated frontiers to escape subjugation. Embracing their nomadic roots, living off the land free and fairly, they constructed a whole society with refugees, peasants, escaped serfs and slaves, Tatars, Ruthenians, Catholics, Orthodox, and Muslims alike. They would become Tatars, Ruthenians, Catholics, Orthodox.
Although conversion to Orthodoxy soon became dominant. Oh, okay.
And Muslims alike. They would become perhaps the most important piece of Ukraine's identity, the Cossacks.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to overstate just how powerful the Cossacks became. Not only with...
They're basically the... what's it called? Jesus Christ, the Dothraki from Game of Thrones. Actually, the Dothraki are more the Mongols, but they were very good they were very good horsemen. The Cossacks.
They're instrumental in leveraging their autonomy and powerful armies in service of the Polish crown, but they became inseparable from the idea of self-determination. The roots of Ukrainian ideas of independence were the Cossacks. And if they weren't treated the way they wanted to be, as equal autonomous partners, then they would be more than happy to fight on behalf of someone else. An opportunity they soon took during the Second Northern War. The Northern Wars were a long series of not altogether related events, but basically amounted to these four powers butting heads for more territory. especially over the Baltic Sea. But the part we're going to focus on is the Nitsuki Uprising, and for this we have Joe from the channel Jabsy.
Although the Cossacks had formed a close bond with the Commonwealth and had participated in numerous wars against the Turks and Tatars, the spirit of independence within their homeland, the Zaporizhian Sich, lived on. Tensions had reached a boiling point when King of Poland John Casimir II treated the Sich with contempt and made efforts to curtail their autonomy, spurred by many local Cossack uprisings. When wars broke out between the empires of Russia, Sweden and Poland-Lithuania, the Cossacks took the opportunity to assert their independence and revolted.
Yeah, Poland and Lithuania suffered basically just because of geography. And I'm not talking about this, but this is a great point. But especially later on, when it's between Prussia, Austria, and Russia, it's like, dude, you're fucked. It sucks. It's really, it's it is what it is. Yeah, it's
under the leadership of Hetman Bohdan Khmelnytsky, align themselves with Moscow. To this day, it is still unclear whether the treaty between the Tsar and the Cossacks aimed for further integration within the Russian Empire, or simply as a temporary military cooperation. But the Russian Empire's growth in the 18th century would ensure that Russia's interests would soon dominate. However, right bank Ukraine still remained loyal to the Commonwealth, and when the left bank Cossacks invaded Poland on the side of Russia, it set off a series of brutal atrocities remembered in Poland as the Deluge, and in right bank Ukraine it is known as the Ruin. This pivotal event would not only weaken the Commonwealth as a regional power, but also result in the creation of a Cossack hetmanate within the ironically far more heavy-handed rule of the Russian Tsars. And if you'd like to learn more about this period, come check out my video on the Khmelnytsky Uprising over on my channel Jabsy.
Now basically from the onset of the uprising, the Cossacks were treated with a certain degree of suspicion by the Russians. They were all too happy to use them to defend against Tatar raids and even to aid them in their conquest of Siberia, but the Tsars knew all too well that a Cossack revolt could spell absolute disaster if they ever lost the hetmanate's favor. All the Cossacks wanted was independence, and Russia simply couldn't allow that to happen. Their fears were pretty well founded, as it turns out, since the Cossacks again switched sides in support of Sweden during the Great Northern War, but this time at the disastrous Battle of Poltava. The Cossack host was defeated, and from this point on, the seeds of malicious distrust in Ukraine had been sown. Russian control over the Cossacks, and Ruthenians in general, would slowly increase over time, accelerated by the partitions of Poland, where all of Ukraine slowly increased over time. Accelerated by the...
Look at this. Prussia, Austria, Russia. Look where Poland is located. They're in such a fucked position. I mean, it's...
partitions of Poland, where all of Ukraine, save for Galicia, found itself under Russian rule. It was of course an added benefit to increase control over the Ruthenians, and that was because they stood between them and something the Russians deeply coveted, the Black Sea.
Of course.
From the 15th century onward, it was clear to the Russians that the only way to truly become a world power like those of Western Europe was through a large, powerful navy, but they lacked much in the way of seaports. This was one of the motivations behind the Northern Wars, after all, gaining control of the Baltic Sea, and it wasn't long before Russia started eyeing the Black Sea as well, inconveniently controlled by the Ottomans and the Tatars. One Russo-Turkish war later, Crimea was now easy pickings and annexed in 1783, just in case you thought Russia annexing Crimea was a new phenomenon.
No.
As with most of the territories acquired by the Russian Empire, Ukraine was...
I hope he's gonna get more into this, the history of how Crimea transferred to Ukraine, because from what I know, you might correct me unless he does later on in the video, but I'm pretty sure what happened was Russia owned Crimea for the longest time, and then the Soviet Union became what it became, and for administrative purposes, Crimea was transferred to Ukraine. But because they always thought that the Soviet Union was going to exist, it was still the Soviet Union, so...
heavily suppressed. Its Cossack hosts lost more and more of their autonomy, the Ruthenian language we now call Ukrainian was banned, and rebellions were violently put down. This was all part of a process known as Russification, and one of its largest proponents was Catherine the Great. Jews were especially affected by these policies, restricted to stay in an area known as the Pale, in small, economically disadvantaged communities called the shtetl, which greatly contributed to the suppression of Jewish culture. Now, although 19th century Russia was succeeding in the spreading of its internal power, the same cannot be said for its place on the world stage, and their intellectual control over Ruthenia would weaken due to...
I'm getting confused here. Is the territory that's fractured, is it under... it should be under Russian rule, isn't it? Or is he just fracturing it to sort of... for explanations purposes? Because I'm pretty sure this is Russian territory at this point.
Due to several reasons. Firstly was the spreading of the Enlightenment ideas of self-determination during the French Revolution.
Oh my
Secondly,
god. Fuck. Dude. Napoleon came and went within 15 years.
Revolutions of 1848. And thirdly, the very overt demonstration that Russia was not the invincible power it fancied itself, losing major world conflicts in the disastrous campaigns of the Crimean War and the Russo-Japanese War, had exposed a weakness in the Tsarist regime that had stubbornly lacked reform and industrialization on the scale of other nations. It's not surprising then to see that Ukraine was at the ready to go its own way during the worst conflict Europe was to know at the time, at the outbreak of the First World War, the effects of which would lead to the Russian Civil War. It's worthwhile to remember that the Russian Civil War was by no means a monolith. It was a complicated network of ever-changing alliances, and this is no more evident than in Ukraine, where it is remembered as the Ukrainian War for Independence.
Didn't a bunch of territory Ukraine included was transferred to the Germans under the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, which I'm pretty sure he's going to talk about? Because isn't that how they gain independence? Or is there like a civil war?
An independence they ultimately did not achieve. The anti-Bolshevik White Army allied with some of the Ukrainian nationalists, who in turn had allied with the Second Polish Republic. The Black Army had initially seized swathes of territory to form an anarcho-socialist society before eventually allying with the Bolshevik Reds, and the Bolsheviks even used Ukraine as a bargaining chip to seal a peace with Germany in 1918, but also with Poland.
Look how much territory they gave up. This is insane. This is insane. If Germany was able to win the Western Front, it's insane how much territory they gave up. Look at this, man. They gave everything. Ukraine, Poland, all the Baltic states. I mean, Jesus Christ.
Poland in 1921, which is where the borders were ultimately settled on again, splitting Ukraine in two. It was not until the Second World War that West Ukraine would be reunited by force. I've covered the history of the Soviet Union in a separate video, so I won't go into too much detail about this era here, but I do want to go over some important details in Ukraine's more contemporary development. The first was that of exploitation. Ukraine became a massive center of industrialization and natural resources in the Soviet era, making it a huge target for two of humanity's worst dictators. Not only Hitler during the invasion of the Soviet Union, but also the Soviets' own premier Joseph Stalin, whose land reforms would cause the Great Soviet Famine, known as the Holodomor, which led to the deaths of between 3 and 12 million Ukrainian peasants.
Can you just imagine that? 12 million people died for nothing, you know? And what's even more staggering to me is you hear all these numbers in the Second World War about millions of troops being surrounded, armies getting just decimated during Operation Barbarossa in 1940. You know, one army, a million men, another army, 800,000, another army, 708. It's insane. The numbers were insane. 27 million Russians died, Soviets, during the Second World War. And you think to yourself, this war, man, this war, between 50 and 80 million died during the Second World War. You think to yourself, those numbers are insane. And then you casually just throw in, oh yeah, by the way, we had a famine, 12 million people died. You know, at least in the war, you know, when you're fighting a war, at least, you know, you have a gun to fight against. You know, a gun to fight against your enemy. You know, you're not completely at the mercy of what Stalin deciding, oh, a million people are going to die today because I'm going to export all the grain from Ukraine. It's, you know.
A majority of the more than 2 million Soviet Jews who perished in the Holocaust were also from Ukraine, which erased almost all of its historical Jewish community. In Kiev alone, the SS killed more than 30,000 Jews in just 2 days during the infamous Beben Yar massacre. The second is more to do with Ukraine's current geopolitical standpoint, which I think is vital to understanding post-independence Ukraine. which has been in a push and pull in two directions directly linked to its unique geography. The vast open steppes are still envied by the Kremlin, who has...
He's not going to talk about how Crimea was transferred to the Ukraine. Maybe I'm remembering this wrong, all right? I don't want to come off here and saying, oh, this happened 1,000%. But I've been hearing about this, a lot, that Crimea was transferred to Ukraine in the 50s and 60s. I don't know why he didn't talk about it.
Lost one of its great buffer zones to NATO.
Yeah.
Pro-Western leadership in this young nation has been hamstrung by Russian influence on more than one occasion. Russia wants Ukraine to be a quiet and stable ally, and they've actively supported pro-Russian separatists since 2014. The Dnieper River still forms the nucleus of the nation, and a divide that has gone back centuries by influences from outside powers. The inhabitants on the east of this river are still more likely to identify as and to speak Russian.
Yeah, this map represents exactly how the elections went. When there are elections in Ukraine, this is how basically the map goes. The West, the East votes for the pro-Russian candidate, and the West votes for the pro-West candidate. And I don't know. I was gonna propose something, but I know that it's never gonna happen.
Thanks to centuries of oppression under the Tsars and the Soviet Union. And of course, the Black Sea is still as hotly contested as ever. Fearing Ukraine moving to closer ties with the European Union and the rampant instability of the Ukrainian crisis, Russia illegally annexed the Crimean Peninsula to protect its Black Sea.
Why does he have to say illegally? When was there an annexation that was legal? You're like, what? The partition of Poland was legal? So, what? The illegally. When was the last time that someone legally annexed a country? I don't know.
Sea ports. The current Ukrainian crisis may feel new, but it's worth remembering that we're not at the end of Ukraine's story, nor are we ever. We're in the middle of its most recent chapter, and conceptualizing its past may help with its future going forward. Thank you to today's sponsor.
It's over. So yeah, he jumped over the whole how did Ukraine acquire Crimea thing, which is, it is what it is, I guess. Unless I'm mistaken. Maybe I am. We'll see. I'm going to Google it after this. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. My thoughts on the video? Very interesting. Very interesting how they came to be. I didn't know that Ruthenian was modern day Ukrainian. I thought that the Ukrainian language stemmed from Russian because it's so similar. But, no, apparently it comes from the Ruthenian language. So it is what it is. Yeah, we'll see what happens here with the Ukraine. By the way, for people who are wondering what you want to propose, when 3 minutes ago, when I saw the map of the Ukraine, I was thinking, wouldn't it be simpler, and I know it's never going to happen, but wouldn't it be simpler for the pro-Russian Ukrainian to just join Russia and the Western Ukrainian to just become Western Ukraine? Of course, it's never going to happen unless there's a war. Then maybe, but yeah. So tell me, guys, what you think, what you thought about my reaction. If you liked it, leave a like, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for staying till the end. I'll see you guys next time. See you guys.